And we are back on the Zero Hour. You know, a story that hasn't gotten nearly enough attention is the fact that the United States government has given Shell Oil permission to start drilling again in the Arctic. The last time Shell tried drilling for oil in the Arctic in 2012, it had to abandon operations after an oil rig ran aground. But Shell assures us that, quote unquote, this time it will be different, end quote. Now, well, all right then. This is a serious story. This is one that people should be worried about, in my opinion. But here to enlighten us more on it is Jamie Henn. Jamie has joined us before. He is the co-founder of 350.org and its communications director. And Jamie, am I overstating the case on this one?
No, this is certainly a serious fight, and it's an iconic issue, and one that is serious for the Arctic, one that's serious for the port of Seattle, where Shell is trying to stage its operations, and one that's serious for President Obama's climate legacy. It's really revealing about the way this administration continues to, on the one hand, promote climate solutions and try and cut emissions, and on the other, makes terrible decisions like this that really open up more of our federal land and important environmental places to be used by this industry to pump more carbon into the atmosphere.
Yeah, and let's help us try to wrap our heads around. I mean, you illustrated three great dimensions of this story, but help us wrap our heads around the gravest part of it first, which is number one. My understanding is that drilling in the Arctic is even more dangerous than it is in the Gulf of Mexico, where, of course, we've already seen a terrible tragedy because A, the technology doesn't exist to clean up a spill that's submerged under the ice, and B, the nearest Coast Guard station is what? How many miles away? More than 1,000?
Yeah, it's over 1,000 miles away. Yeah, no, the Arctic, I mean, even the oil industry itself calls the Arctic the final frontier of drilling, and it's a dangerous frontier at that. You highlighted some of the key problems there, just the remoteness of the drilling areas, the fact that there aren't proper Coast Guard stations or resources to really deal with the spill. Or, as you mentioned, if a spill happens in the wrong season, it could be right there under the ice, which would be almost impossible to clean up and could cause absolute long-term devastation to the fragile ecosystems up there, which, again, provide a huge amount of food for not only Alaska, but for the nation as well. So it's a real big threat. You know, the important thing about drilling like this is that even if everything goes according to plan and they don't have a devastating oil spill, this is still a huge impact on not only the local environment, where all the drilling and testing has a big impact on wildlife in the area, but also for our climate. A recent study in Nature came out and showed that if we were going to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, which the United States has agreed on trying to meet that target, that all of the oil in the Arctic would need to stay underground, or in this case, under the sea and under the ice. It's reserves that we cannot afford to burn. We have run out of space in the atmosphere to keep pumping this stuff in there. So this really is the height of a different sort of climate denial, one where you recognize the problem but refuse to do what's necessary in order to stop it.
Well, see, I think this is a great point, too, that people lose, which is we tend to think, particularly because our media, I think, sometimes guides our thinking this way, sort of issue by issue and chunk by chunk. But when we step back and look at this, and obviously 350.org is named for a certain, level of particulate matter in the atmosphere and so on. But when you think about it, I think you put it really well in terms of the big picture, which is either this oil is under the earth, or in this case, underneath the Arctic Ocean, or it is in the atmosphere. There is no third place that it winds up. So if it's in the atmosphere and we don't have room for it, that's another way besides environmental disaster, and perhaps an even more profound way that the outcome could be catastrophic and is likely to be catastrophic, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, I think one of the reasons why the Arctic has become such a symbol and it's such an important fight is just because of the ludicrous nature of what's going on. I mean, this is a region which basically has completely melted. They're doing yacht races up there where it used to be frozen throughout the entire year. And the oil industry's response, having seen this, is to say, let's go drill for more. Let's make the problem even worse. Bill McKibben, our founder, wrote a piece in the New York Times that became the most, I think, tweeted article yesterday, where he said, this is like tobacco companies applying for permission to put cigarette machines in cancer wards. This is that level of adding insult to injury here. It's a good reminder that Shell, a company who, has actually come out and said some of the right words about climate change and tells its investors it takes the issue seriously, is acting in absolutely the opposite direction. They're continuing to pursue these disastrous projects. That should send a real signal to investors who still have money in Shell that this company is intent on wrecking the planet, and to governments that the fossil fuel industry may be, again, beginning to say the right things about climate change and making noise about how they'd accept a very small price on carbon. But they are certainly not changing their business practices in the slightest. If anything, they're accelerating this suicidal push towards getting energy from even more extreme places and taking even greater risks to do it.
As are we all as a civilization. We're talking with Jamie Henn, co-founder and communications director of 350.org. I saw that article by Bill McKibben. And if you care to, you can tell Bill this quick story of mine. When I was 17, I worked in a chronic diseases ward, and I saw cancer patients literally smoking cigarettes through tracheotomies, and emphysema patients who were blue from oxygen deprivation, taking the masks off their face so they could smoke a cigarette. My response to this is that's not just the oil companies, that's us, all of us, if we don't step in and end this cycle very, very soon. Am I being overly dramatic?
Well, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think that we're all caught up in the system and are addicts of varying degrees. That's a responsibility for us to begin to find ways that we can cut our own use of fossil fuels and clean up our lives as much as possible. But it's also a matter of taking on these carbon cartels and really trying to challenge the power that they have over our government, which continues to subsidize the fossil fuel industry at record amounts to the tune of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars per year. I think people are really beginning to fight back, however, and that fight is really going on in kind of two key levels right now. One is continuing to put pressure on the Obama administration to not allow this drilling to go forward. They granted conditional approval to Shell to drill in one particular area of the Arctic, but there are other areas that Shell and other companies are trying to get into. There are also different hurdles that the companies still have to go over in terms of EPA regulations and state regulations. So there are ways to keep fighting this at the federal level. We have great allies at the Natural Resources Defense Council and Oceana and others who are doing that. So people should look online and find ways that they can add their voice to that fight federally. The second most important place, and really the front lines of this fight right now, is in Seattle, where Shell is trying to station their major drilling rig that will be sort of their Arctic base, where they'll ship equipment back and forth. People in Seattle are really rising up against this thing. The companies have put immense pressure on the city and on the port to try and let them stage the equipment there. But thankfully, the city council is actually kind of rising up against this plan and trying to shut them down from having access. And this weekend, hundreds of people will be taking to the water in kayaks and boats to sort of be a Shell No flotilla, which should be quite the thing to see. So if people have friends in Seattle or people they know there, definitely spread the word that this will be taking place this weekend. It will be quite the event, and definitely a kind of David versus Goliath fight taking place on the water there out west. So, I think you're right. It's hard to see how we're all caught up, but it's so inspiring that folks are really beginning to rise up against these companies and say that, look, we have to draw the line somewhere, and the Arctic is certainly a good place to start.
Yeah, and I think you raise a great point, Jamie Henn, about the points of sensitivity where people can channel their activism. I know we had one in Maine over the shipping of
That's right.
of oil. Now we have a Seattle. I believe you're talking about, is this the Polar Pioneer oil rig? I think it's supposed to arrive today in Seattle, along with 25 vessels or something along those lines?
Yeah, they have all sorts of equipment that's sort of sitting out in Puget Sound right now or trying to make in. So, it's a pretty amazing fight out there, and a story that's well worth following. I think what you're saying, and what we've tried to do here at 350 is begin to realize where citizens have strength to really stop these projects. The fossil fuel industry is incredibly powerful. They spend more money lobbying our government and on elections than any other industry. The Koch brothers are looking to spend $1 billion on this coming election, more than either the Democrats or the Republican Party. But citizens have an incredible ability to begin to hold back these projects on the ground. Everywhere you turn, every proposed pipeline, fracking well, coal mine is seeing resistance from amazing coalitions that span the political spectrum: farmers, ranchers, students, business leaders, and that's coast to coast. So that's the inspiring piece here. I think that the industry has, maybe stepped too far into people's backyards and into our communities, and people are beginning to really rise up and push back. That pressure needs to be heard in Washington and needs to be heard in this upcoming election, so that politicians realize that they can't continue to stand on the side of polluters, but really begin to listen to the American people more and start taking action on this issue.
Well, and that's, the fear, of course, is that we'll get another politician, Democrat or Republican, who will do what Barack Obama has done and surrender on these critical issues. But we've also learned that activism can change the debate, whether it's making phone calls to Washington and showing up in the streets for demonstrations, and particularly for the kinds of targeted demonstrations we're seeing in Seattle, kayaktivists in the water and people on the land. So thank you for your activism on this issue. Thank you for educating us on this issue. And Jamie Henn of 350.org, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Good to join you.
Thanks once again. And we will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and when it comes to the environment, this is the Zero Hour.